Okay, so we're going to get started. So I sent out a announcement about this yesterday. Somebody turned in this file that's actually really well done with no name on it. So I have no idea whose this is. So so this assignment was graded. So if you turned it in, most of you guys, your names are on all of this stuff, whatever. But anyway, somebody should let me know so that they actually get a grade instead of a 0. So we're going to go through all of these. You can see all the names that are listed up here under all of this. So if you don't see your name and you turned in a file, let me know. So we are going to start really quick with Ryan's file. Don't worry, I'm going to go through most, if not everybody's file right here. So if we take a look at this, I said to Ryan when I sent this back to him, whatever, this is exactly what we're trying not to do. There's a little bit of texture right here, but pretty much it's all gone in here. And then it sort of comes back in here a little bit. And then anyway, so it's a little bit all over the place. But it's basically not what, it's too blown out. It's all too plastic skin. I mean, there's just nothing in here. You'll see a little bit of some texture in here. I don't know if you can even, yeah, you can see it on the screen here, but then it just goes to oblivion right here. I'm going to point this out now because just so that people know, but I'm going to point it out in other places as well. If we take a look at the original of this girl, you can see that there are areas in here of very smooth skin, like this area that's right over in here is pretty smooth. Most of this is all pretty sharp. This is all pretty sharp in here. But you get down to like her lower cheek right down here. And what's happening is that I've got a very narrow, shallow depth of field in this, and this is actually out of focus, and that's why this is so smooth. So if you take a look, you can sort of see where it begins to come a little bit more into focus. You get a little bit more texture here, but then once you really get to her lips and her eyes and that kind of stuff, it becomes tack sharp here. So if you sample areas that are over in this out of focus region and use them to actually smooth out your skin texture here, it'll definitely smooth it out, but it overshoots the mark because the skin that's out of focus, sort of by definition, has no texture left in it. So I just sort of want to point that part out. I'm not going to save this. I want to take a look at Jack's next. So there was something that really strange happened in Jack's, and he's not here, so, speaking of, can you start me reciting? But you take a look at this sort of what's happened in the lips right here, and you can see there's this massive repeating pattern thing that's actually happening here. There's this weird, almost, I don't know even what this is. It looks like cross-textured, whatever. It's almost like he grabbed texture from one spot and then just kept hitting it again and again and again and again and again, because this is really, really hyper-repeating in here. Also, and he was not the only person to do this, a number of you felt like you needed to get rid of all those glossy highlights that are on her mouth. And that's really not the case. You need to, that's what keeps her seeming like she's alive. That's what keeps her mouth seeming like it's got moisture, it's wet, that kind of, the eyes are the same thing. If you take the catch lights out of eyes, it makes somebody look dead. So those things are actually supposed to be there. So when I talked about fixing the things on the lips, it was more like there was pieces of flaky skin, chapped lips, that kind of stuff. Those were the things to sort of to deal with. It's not the creases in her lips. Creases in the lips actually should be there. You maybe wanted to pull them back. Here, let's take a look at it so I can show you what we're talking about, what I'm talking about. Some of these creases, you might want to like bring them back a little bit. Like this one that's going sort of at an angle right here looks to be like probably more of a scar. So does this one, something like that. She split her lip, something along those lines. Maybe you would feel like you wanted to bring them down a little bit so that the shadow areas of this weren't so extreme. You could like lift them a little bit, but you certainly don't want to eliminate it. You don't want to do this because that just does not look real at all. But we talked about how you use safeties in doing your retouching, your frequency separation work specifically. And so I'm going to show you how easy it is to actually leverage that now that we've done it. So if we go to take a look at where this actually happened in Jack's, this is all his frequency work, is all his top stuff. So if I kill his low layer right here, you can see that that's where he actually did some of the color work, and it's the color work that basically flattened this mouth out. So because I've got a low copy here, the one underneath it still functions as a low copy as well. I can add a layer mask to this low copy, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm just, adding a layer mask to the low copy, hitting the B key to get a brush, checking to make sure that it's a relatively hard brush. So I'm going to leave it up around 66, somewhere in there. Again, I don't want to overspray over the outside of the lips of this mouth. I want some control, but I also don't want it to look like I've cut this in using a razor blade. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Make my brush a little bit smaller. Make sure that black is my foreground color, and then simply I can come in here and bring this back to what it looked like. And this will take care of the low frequency work in here, but it doesn't deal with the high frequency work. However, I can do the exact same thing on that. So I'm going to go up to the high copy because this is where all that weird texture work came in. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a layer mask to this and pull this back. Okay, what is going on? And then if you feel like you wanted sort of a mix of both, if you felt like, well, okay, I don't want those things quite as deep or whatever, you could actually leverage this. You can take the opacity of that top layer, the second high layer right here, and just start to pull the opacity down so that it starts to take some of that part back out. Take it back. It's not going to be that opacity. It's going to be the opacity of the layer mask. So in the opacity of the layer mask, and this is true of all layer masks, if you look up in your properties palette, you'll actually see there is a density slider. And watch what happens. If you take a look at this, you can see that I've got black on this layer mask right now, which is hiding all of this. You can actually take the density and you can actually start to pull it back, and you'll actually see this whole thing starts to get lighter. And if we bring it all the way back to 0, whatever, it just completely goes. So this is a way to control the density of your mask. So this would sort of be the compromise move to actually get half of it. So this would be the difference in what was actually going on there. So it's just something to sort of be aware of in terms of all of that. Xavier, are you okay with us working as a group on your picture? Okay, there's a couple of things. Xavier's was really well done, but I want to point out, again, he took this up to the, really strong 90% level. I just want to talk about how we deal with the last 10% of it, and I'd like everybody to have that experience. So do me a favor, that being said, because it might take a little while to copy this, let's go really quickly, if you could go to our server, because that's how I'm going to give you his file. So simply log into our server. And I'm just dragging his version of this file out onto the sort of more the landing homepage of our server, where you guys will actually be able to grab it. So if you could, it's sitting right here. It's his last name, Campbell, and it's that 7.1 Photoshop file. If you guys could actually go ahead and start the copy down of that, then once I get through the rest of this, we'll be able to jump into this really quickly. We have a Would it surprise you if I said to you we have a big day today? Say what?
Each day has like a lot of information.
Yeah, every day. It says it's locked? Hang on one second. All right. Wait, did it let you on the server?
Yeah.
What is going on here? I fucking hate this thing. Well, so much for getting this done quickly. All right, hang on one second. Don't try to copy either one of those. Try to copy that one. Did that work? The spinning wheel or its copying wheel? Well, let's see how that goes. I'm going to keep barreling through this. Hopefully that's going to work. Okay, so I want to take a look at Ennie's next. And again, just subtle things that you pick up in here, but something to be aware of. And you can see there's this weird sort of shape that's right here. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out what it really was. And then I realized this is actually part of her ear. So if we take a look at where the new version, not the new version, but actually the spill removal got replaced, this is where it exists. So I'm going to shut everybody else off. So this is I can leave the white background on. This is actually a spill from her ear that actually got removed. So this is a trick that I want all of you to remember to actually think about doing. When you're doing spill removal, this part becomes really, really critical. I'm going to zip back out all the way. I'll show you how to fix this in just a second. But it's to turn off your mask to look to see where you've actually done your spill removal. So to turn your mask off, simply hold on the Shift key and click on it, and it'll put a big red X on it. And then you can actually go in and take a look. So for instance, we can see an area that's right down in here where there's some spill removal. The color is actually missing a little bit there. There's another place where it's missing actually right in here. It's actually clipped her ear there. And again, this happens to everybody. It's just being able to look at this stuff. You can see on this side over here that if this one hair right here is actually in the shot, this is actually missing spill removal. So you can continue to do spill removal without that whole mask on it. So I'm going to hit the B key to do spill removal. Change my blending mode to color, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Again, with spill removal, we want to do a really soft brush. And then I'm just going to make my brush a little bit larger and sample an area right in here and go ahead and take care of those hairs that are left out. So the little bitty ones right there. This all needs to be added back into here. As I come down in here, things are looking pretty good in here, but this is where you can see the ear that what happened was that she actually used the spill removal for the hair color across this skin. So to see what that really looks like, I'm going to go ahead and sample this color that's out here and then put it on her skin right here, and you can see it makes it that sort of like really sort of grayed out, desaturated skin. I'm going to undo that, and instead I'm going to, there's another hit that's right here. I'm going to sample the lower part of her ear and then simply put it back in onto her ear. There's a little part that's in the center right here. There's also another small little part that's right here. So remember, when you're getting down to these areas where the hair is actually touching skin, the ears, that sort of stuff, you have to go back to a much harder brush. I would do a completely hard brush so that you can really drag it right along that line. And so anyway, just wanted to point that part out. But this whole idea of turning your masks off to really see what's going on. So for instance, if she was trying to remove the spill that runs along this side of the neck, you can see that she stopped short of this. So there's probably spill that's still existing down here. So it just gives you a place to actually spot the problem areas. If she's keeping in these hairs right here, you can see these are no longer have had spill removed from them. So again, you would want to sample color over here so that you actually get all of those and all of this that's coming out. Just whatever is sort of like you might or might not think it's in your image. All of that's missing. All of this is missing. We'll sample something from more over here. All of that's missing. All of that's missing. All of that's missing. And when you turn the mask, back on, again, she's completely knocked this out. It's not there, but and a lot of times that stuff will be there, and it's just an easy way to spot it and sort of troubleshoot yourself. So you got it? Everybody else get it? Great. Couple more to get through. I want to look at Mari's next. So Mari, you did an interesting one, and not that it's wrong, I'm just curious about how, depending on how it is that you work on this stuff. So let me just get this layers palette out bigger. So on your split frequency work, you actually label them as low pass and high pass. Do you do your split using the high pass filter, or do you do it using apply image? It doesn't matter, I was just curious. They both do the exact same thing.
I'm pretty sure the high pass filter.
So you start with the high pass filter and then you actually do a blur underneath it. So so in your case, the way you look at it, again, we went over this in the very first one we introduced split frequency. When you're doing the version that I've showed you where you use apply image, you basically build the low frequency layer first by blurring the image till you don't see the detail that you're trying to edit. In the high pass version, you do the exact opposite. You start with basically nothing and you bring in the high detail, the high frequencies that you want to keep, and then you actually establish the low frequencies after you do the high ones. Okay, I was just curious about that. But you've also got this one weird filter that's sitting right up here. It's this LHP. It stands, I think, for lip high pass. I think you did it again.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. No, because it brings up a great point. Doing split frequency doesn't have to happen only once. You can do all of your split frequency work. You can then merge all of that work into a new layer. We would call that another new version. It might be new version 2, new version 3, new version 4, whatever, and split that again. Because sometimes when you're trying to do, especially if you're compositing stuff together, you've got to bring background and subjects together into the same thing in order to do the retouching. And that happens later in the game. So There's people who will do splitting again and again and again and again and again, depending on what it is they're really trying to accomplish. So don't think that it all has to happen just in one go. So, but the issue that I ran into this, and this is something you also all need to be really careful about, is this thing got knocked out of register. So to see what that really means, I'm going to turn off everybody else. At least I think this got knocked out of register. Yeah, it's just the mouth. So she's got, it's basically just on the mouth. So this was sort of a version of what I was talking about earlier, that she's actually, she didn't eliminate everything on the lips. She just pulled the stuff sort of like pretty far back. But if you cut the, I'm going to take the mask off right now to knock it out. And you can see that when I did that, there's a slight halo around her nose. And you can see it's a blur on the whole thing because the entire image has been shifted slightly up. So you can see it's happening here. It sort of has a blurring effect on it. The image has been knocked slightly up and also to the side a little bit. Was that intentional? Is that how you blur this stuff?
That is not intentional.
Oh, okay. Well,
Copying and pasting, and then like I tried to move it back because like when you copy and paste the mask, like it offsets the image.
right. Okay. So this is a great trick about this. So her image, this is now out of register. So this is a total aside, but just so that you guys know, there's a way to spot that and to fix it. So I'm going to turn this layer on. I've got everything off above this, but I'm going to change the blending mode of the layer that's out of register. I'm going to change the blending mode from linear light down to difference. And when you do difference, what difference actually does in this is that it will actually, anything in the image, see if you've got, no, you're still 100% there. I'm also going to turn everybody else off because I'm getting a weird look at this guy right here. So, and I'm also going to unclip this. So what you can see now is when you use difference, what happens with difference is that anywhere where the tone and the color of the image of two layers are exactly the same, you get black. Wherever they are not the same, you start getting color. And if they are the complete opposite of each other, you get white. So you can see in her case right here, most of it is pretty similar, but you can spot the eyebrows and the nose. It's easier for me to do either one of the eyes, or I'm actually going to do the nose first. It's probably the easiest one to get to. So I'm going to select this top layer. I'm going to go to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm going to do this with my arrow keys because your motion in here is it's hardly any at all. And I'm going to start tapping this down, and you'll see that line is beginning to disappear on her nose. Let me just see if I can move this. What is going on here? I can see the motion in this. Yeah, that is kicked way off. All right, that's weird. It's not moving until I actually let go. I'm not actually getting any preview of this at all. Sorry. Layer isn't locked. Okay, it still looks like this does not have full opacity, but it does. All right, well, sorry, that didn't work. I'll get back to showing you guys how to align layers later on a file that I don't know why this is not working, because I'm trying to move this thing, and it actually shows it, even if I go to normal, I'm moving this part. I can see that I'm moving it around, but it's not actually registering the motion around here when I actually change the blending mode down to difference. So that's bizarre. Anyway, sorry about that. Waste of time. We'll come back to it, I promise. That one we'll do. Okay, 2 more to show you really quickly, and then we'll do Xavier's. So this was another one that people sort of ended up doing here. If we take a look at Jordan's hair patch in here, where is that guy? All right, this is another one that's actually not what I expected in here, because I don't see where the hair fix happened in here. And it doesn't look like it happened down. Oh, never mind. I know where it happened. I know what I'm looking at something completely different. So if we take a look at this, you can actually see what Jordan tried to do in this. He actually tried to do that hair fix in his split frequency work. And you can see that things like that are the exact opposite of what you want to be doing in split frequency work, because the problem is that now that you've split this, you've got the detail is in one layer and the tone and color are in another layer. So when you try to do a hair patch like this, you've got to do it in both spots, and they both need to be in perfect register with each other, which is virtually impossible to do. So this would never happen here like this. This would actually happen outside of it. You would do it in one of 2 places. You would either do all of your split frequency work first and then add the hair patch on top of that, on top of the split frequency layer, separate by itself. Or you would have done it in the very beginning before you made the new version. The new version would exist. You would do a pixel retouch layer above that. You would add the hair. That would become your new version 2, and that would be what you would split. Does that make sense, everybody, what I just went through? Okay. Actually, I can do it with Max, so that'll be a good place to end this on. So in Max, you can actually sort of see where the hair fix is. It's sitting right here. And it looks in some ways pretty good. The bottom line down here looks reasonably good, but the problem that you run into with this is that you end up with hair that doesn't match up. You can spot it in a lot of places. Now, hair can be really confusing, so a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't really see that. But look at what's going on in this line right here. Again, I'm going to turn his hair on and off, and you can actually see there's a break in the consistency of the hair. So the hair, it starts moving in one direction and all of a sudden it gets cut off, and then the old hair starts to take over. You can see the break happening all along here. So the solution to this, if he had enough hair in here, I don't think he does, but they do, but if you take a look here, this is another problem. All these are like super soft edges here. Again, this is blending old texture with new texture, and you hope you get away with it, but you never really do. So instead, what you would want to do is, I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush, select this guy, hit X key so that it's painting white. Normal blending mode all the way through here, whatever. You want to carry this all the way up to the edge of the frame. I've said this to a lot of people in here. Bring this up to the whole edge of the frame. I'm going to go ahead and break the chain link between here. Transform this so that I can actually get it long enough. That's doing the mask, sorry. Do the hair. And drag it up long enough so that it actually hits the frame, the edge of the frame. So that way you basically cover all the original texture in here and you take it all the way to the frame. So you don't need to worry about where these things, 2 things match. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, we can close that up. Can everybody go ahead and open Xavier's then? So I want you to zoom in to the lower, so basically into her mouth. I'm looking on the left side of her mouth. And what you can see is if I zoom right in here, so it's right underneath her nose, right sort of above her lip on the left side of her mouth. There's an area in here that does not look like it's got skin texture that's really completely there. It's there somewhat, but you see it like it separates out like quite a bit. If we take a look around other places in here, you might spot it again, like this area that's right sort of next to her mouth right here. This is another sort of problem area that I would actually want to fix. So on the surface, this looks really, really good, but again, I want to sort of like take care of those areas that seemingly do not have the texture that I would expect there. This is like, I've got texture on the upper part of her lip, I've got texture here on her cheek, I'm losing some texture that's right in here, all of that kind of stuff. I want to fix that part so it seems believable. So I'm going to open up the split frequency work. This is where it is. If you open up the split frequency group and go to the high layer, that's actually where this is all going to be. Again, this is all detail that we're actually talking about here. So to get this again, when you're doing your detail work, you want to be using the clone stamp tool. So hit the S key to get that. The reason we want to use the clone stamp tool is that even though Healing Brush will transfer a texture, it also tries to blend that new texture in with the old texture in terms of the tone and color of it. And that's where you get the whole diffusion setting of using the Healing Brush tool. So a Healing Brush tool works great when you're working in the low layer because it's exactly the stuff that you're trying to do. But in the high layer, you're looking for a really pretty hardcore copy of detail from one spot to another. So we use the clone stamp tool to do that. You also use a really hard clone stamp tool. Again, I don't want any of those sort of softer edges. I don't do it at 100% because you would spot that, but I'll crank this up to 80, 85%, somewhere in there in terms of the hardness of that brush. Leave it as a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and we're going to go after trying to fix this area. I'm actually going to grab some skin that I think is going to be right up sort of above this area here. So I'm going to come into this area, you look at my screen, and you can sort of see roughly where I'm at. This is where I'm going to sample from in the beginning. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and click here to sample. And then I'm going to come over here to this area that I feel like needs more texture in it and simply drag a line down. And so this is going to be my before and after right now. And you can see it restores a believable amount of hair texture to that. I don't get from texture to, it wasn't that it was void of texture, it wasn't like it was completely smooth, but it didn't have the same feeling. I mean, take a look at this. Just the difference is enormous. I've also unchecked my alignment right here, and the reason I've unchecked my alignment is that now I can go to someplace else that I also feel like this area right in here needs a little bit more texture as well. Instead of having my source point change and come down and stay in alignment with this move, it's going to always remain up at that top point, the initial one that I set. So now when I click on this and drag down, it's not pulling it off to the side. It's actually giving me that same texture that I actually just did for the other one. Interestingly enough, and something to point out to you guys is, let's say that you also wanted to work down here on the area that's right below her lip. Again, my source point has not come over here with me. My source point is still up on her cheek. But if I actually think, okay, there's this area that's right underneath her, the center of her lip, that's got a little bit too much texture that I would like to knock that down, I'm going to click and bring this down right here, and it actually does a pretty fair job in here, but here, I'm going to undo that again. It's a fair job in the middle, but look what happens if I come over to the side. If I start coming over to the side, you can see that it's actually pulling skin from the side of her nose. This is getting really close to the side of her nose. And the skin here does not match the skin underneath her lip at all. And what you need to be aware of is what they call skin grain. So what's happening here, if I hit Command Z to undo that, the grain that's actually happening underneath her lip is going pretty much from her lip straight down. You can think of this as like the grain of wood. Whereas the grain that's on the side of her cheek over here is actually much more at an angle. This is more like at a 45-degree angle coming down. So when we actually put the wrong grain direction in this, you spot it. It's this grain right here. Here, I can even make this worse. I'm going to do a new sample point that's even got a harder skin angle to it. And you can see that the grain now underneath her chin is actually going at a 45-degree angle from the upper right down to the lower left, and it does not match this at all. So where you pull skin grain from, you actually need to be conscious of the direction of the grain. You need to be conscious of, again, the things that we talked about in the very beginning, whereas if you are pulling from an area that's out of focus, that actually has no grain, you obliterate this part, you just blow it out. And again, that's something that we're trying to avoid. Is this making sense to you guys, all of this part? Okay, one last thing I want to talk about here, because we're here and it's just an easier one to do it. A lot of you guys did pretty good smoothing work in this. When I look at Xavier's here, it's a good start. I would actually consider wanting to push it further. And what I'm looking at is all these transition lines right here. You can see this area of color on the side of her face right here. You can actually almost trace the outline of where that is. I want to blend all those in. I don't want those outlines to actually exist there. You can see there's one above her face, so you can see it. However, when you're looking at this with all the texture in here as well, with the full image, I think personally it's more difficult to see. So when I do my blending work here, I actually work on my low frequency, or I'm going to look at the low frequency copy layer here by itself. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball. It turns everybody else off. And now these things are easier for me to spot. I can sort of see a dark area here, a dark area here, a light area here, a really hard line here, all of that kind of stuff. This is where the mixer brush is your best friend. So we're going to work with the mixer brush on this really quick. So again, come up to your brush menu, come down to the mixer brush. Make sure, and this happens to me, and I don't know why this is. I think that this is a bug, actually. You can see when I pick the mixer brush, there's actually a color of tone that's in the sample up here at the very top. It's right up here. There's a sample in here. When this brush is set up the way this brush is set up, this should be transparent because this is the load on the brush. To get that to be transparent, click and turn off the icon that's actually right next to it. That's the one that if you hover over it, it says do not load the brush at the beginning. Because I want this thing to pick up color as I'm working with it. Make sure that you have the low frequency copy layer selected. In my case, again, I'm going to do a wetness of 20, a load of 100, a mix of 100, and then I'm going to start around a 40% for my flow. Again, flow is what I really use to control how aggressive this brush is. If you start working with it and it seems too aggressive, knock the flow down. If it doesn't seem like it's happening fast enough for you, push the flow up. And that's basically the way to control it. I'm going to click my drop-down menu and make sure that I've got a completely soft brush. That's sort of what you want going on in here. And then you need to think about what it is you really want to do. Do I want to drag this darker color of her cheek up into the lighter area, or do I want to do the opposite? For me, I think I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. And I'm going to start in this light area that's right underneath her arm, and I'm just going to do a couple of lines to come quick downly on that. And you can see that happens way too fast. I mean, this is actually even a bigger problem than we started with. So I'm going to go back in history to undo all the mixer brush stuff that I just did. Still make sure that I'm selecting that low frequency layer. And I'm going to drop my flow down to 12%. And a bigger brush to make it a little bit less obvious. And I'm going to start to do the same thing again. And it's a much softer line in here. Again, I'm just trying to tap those lines to get them off. If you go a little bit too far, you can actually drag from the bottom back up, and I'm just trying to blend in that whole area. So if we take a look at what I've just done with my mixer brush in total, you can look at this area right here, you'll see what happens. It's just softened that entire thing up. So I'm going to go back to where it's actually softer again. The big spot that I'm going to go after, though, is that dark spot that's actually on the top of her lip. So I'm going to make my brush smaller. And again, I'm going to fix the area that's right under her nose. I'm just going to start dragging down like that to smooth all of that out. There's a line that looks like it's running right down here between those sort of areas of red. I'm going to drag those across one another and soften that part up a little bit. Then I'm actually going to come down and start to work on that shadow side of her face. So I'm going to start to drag down, and it needs a little bit more. So I'm going to drag my flow back up again to 30, almost 40 here, and start to drag that part in. And then I'm going to actually go after that part that's right on her lip. Just to try to soften that part up, part that's right by her nose, part that's on the side of her face. Now I'm going to come over the other side and bring down to try to get a little bit rid of that small part that's on the other top of the lip. I'm actually going to go after the area that's under her eye a little bit more to lighten that part up. But you can see the areas that we're trying to actually go after, they're much more obvious in this sort of environment than they are when you've actually got all the detail on. So I'm going to turn everybody else back on. And we're going to do a color history snapshot of this. So I'm going to click on to add history snapshot and say OK to that. And then go up to the top, and you can see Xavier's original one and where we're at right now. You can see that whole skin part has actually smoothed out considerably, but still is full of texture. So again, that and that. If you feel like you took something too far, like you say, oh God, I'd really like to bring a little bit of that shadow on her lip back, again, go back to your low frequency layer, simply add a layer mask to this. So I'm going to add a layer mask. Go to a regular brush, the B keyed but regular brush. I'm going to hit the X key to make black my foreground color, and I'm going to drop my flow way down. I'm going to bring my flow down to like 1 or 2%. And then working on the layer mask, I can start, let me check and make sure my brush is a soft brush. It is. I can start scrubbing on this area to sort of bring some of that shadow back, and it just brings it back slowly. So this is the difference in what I just did to bring it sort of back. So it sort of gives you the ultimate control on this. Are there questions about any of this? You can close that up. You do not need to save that. Okay, you can close that file up. We are going to take a jump off the deep end. We are heading for a completely different place right now because today starts the really serious compositing work. So I know some of you guys have done compositing before. Show of hands, compositing, yeah, something you're sort of interested in. Okay. Anybody in this room do any like illustrating or painting, or anybody do any of that drawing, any of that sort of hand artisty kind of thing, whatever? So there's a problem with that, not a problem with that, but there's a challenge in that. And the challenge in that is what we're going to tackle first in compositing, and it is perspective. So people think they might know what perspective is and how perspective works, but most people don't, unless you're sort of like a painter person, somebody who's really good at that kind of stuff, whatever. So unfortunately for us, or fortunately for us, whatever, we've got to confront that when we actually talk about dealing with compositing, because if your perspectives, so let me ask you this, when you guys have put together your own composites, or you see something like that, whatever, and you look at it and you say to yourself, there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is. Has that happened to you? You have that feeling? It's like something innate, and you're like, okay, but I just know there's something that's not right. 9 times out of 10, it is going to be a perspective mismatch. And so just being aware of it will help you out, but I'm also going to show you what you're looking for, what you need to shoot, the problems that are involved with it. But we have to understand what perspective is first and how it works before we can actually go down that road. So that's what we're going to start with right now. And I'm not going to lie to you right here. I'm actually going to tell you that this is a challenge. However, before we start this, I want to talk about one other thing in this, because it's something that we've got to touch on pretty much all the bases today. When we think about putting two images together, and regardless of what this is, I mean, typically the compositing that I do is I shoot figures in the studio on green screen and I put them into backgrounds that I shoot outside. That's sort of like, or backgrounds that I create and make on my own. That's what I do, a lot of what I do. So when you think about, but I don't want you to think about this as fashion again. That's not what this is about. So you can think about shooting a piece of fruit and putting it into a still I've seen. You can think about shooting a house and moving it to a completely different part of the country. You can think about shooting a group of people and putting them into a completely different location. I mean, you can think about anything that applies to your work. That part doesn't matter. You can think about shooting abstracts and putting elements together. But to have a successful perspective, the images need to appear to have been shot at the same time. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, it needs to look like it was done by one thing, right? So when you're shooting two different elements that you're trying to bring together, what are the things that have to be the same in order for it to look like it was a single photograph? So lighting. I got lighting number one. What else? Shadows, but I would put shadows in with lighting. I'm sorry? Color balance, absolutely. What else? Well, I already told you, perspective. What else? Scale, absolutely. I would certainly say scale. Other things. So here is my list. You might want to take this down because in your compositing work, these are the things that you need to keep uppermost in your mind. And that's, again, what today is going to be all about. I'll give you a second. Ready? Okay. This is just my list in no particular order. Lighting direction. That's one of the ones to start with. It's not just lighting, it's the direction of the light. Exposure. If you have an exposure mismatch, it will not look correct. Contrast. If you have a contrast mismatch, it will not look like it is actually put together. Color. But color doesn't exist alone. Saturation. Also a huge player in this. The shadows, the scale, and finally the perspective. Everybody get those? So we are going to work here on getting those things to match for almost the entire remainder of the semester. I'm going to hit you pretty hard today because your assignment for next week is to actually generate two composites, your first two. So I want to get through enough issues in here for you to at least have a good enough idea to start pulling off some of this. So, okay, so we're going to start. I want you to do this with me. We're going to be looking at an exercise file. We're not going to really be doing any moving. Well, we'll be doing a little bit of stuff on it, whatever. But I want you to actually be able to play with this stuff so that you can see sort of how it works and the way we deal with it and everything else. So anyway, blah, 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 blah. Before we do this, I want to give credit, a shout out to a number of people that I actually, these are the only people that I really sort of follow or pay attention to on YouTube. And I'm going to point this out to you really quickly because the file you're getting ready to work on is actually from one of these guys. So the first guy is this guy right here. And we don't need to listen to his ads, but it's a website called Pix Imperfect, Piximperfect. We're going to be working on one of his files today as well. But again, the people that I'm showing you are the people that I have profound respect for, the people that I learn from, and so I'm just sort of giving shout outs to them. I subscribe to their stuff. I look at their stuff. They are, yeah. Anyway. He's one of them. The next guy I'm going to look for is P-H-L-E-A-R. Is a website called Flern. This is Aaron Nace. He's actually another person that I look at. And then finally, the last person in here, go to PTC, the Photoshop training channel. and it is run by a guy named Jesus Ramirez. And it's Jesus Ramirez's, he did an entire thing on perspective, a workshop thing, whatever, on perspective, whatever, and the file that we're going to be working with right now is his. He was actually, he's not only a really amazing guy when it comes to doing Photoshop, but he really got deeply into doing 3D work in Photoshop. So these are 3D models. Some of this is that we're going to look at are 3D models that he's created. So, but this is his working file for dealing with and sort of trying to understand perspective. So anyway, I just want to give a shout out to those people. They deserve it. It would be my suggestion, depending on how serious you are about Photoshop, that you actually consider looking at their sites and keeping that in mind. Okay, so at any rate, if we go to our class, we are in class number 9 now. If you open up your folder, there is a folder inside week number 9, sessions number 9, called Perspective. And if you click on Perspective, there's a set of files in here. There is a PDF that's talking about how to transform in perspective. We are going to look at that. But if you can't remember the keyboard shortcuts to actually do it, there's a PDF in there. But the file I want you to open up is the one that's at the very top, that 01-01-perspective. If you could actually open that up. So when you open this thing up, again, this is the 3D illustration. So this is basically a 3D world that he's created. And what you can see here is there's what they call a ground plane. So that's the grid that's sitting on the floor. And then it goes back to a horizon line. And then this is the sky above it. So you can just imagine being, I always think about being anywhere in Indiana or anywhere in Illinois that's just flat as shit. And this is what you could actually see, right? This is not Colorado. So at any rate, this is basically the scene or the setup that we're going to actually start with. If you take a look at your layers palette over on the side, you'll actually see there's a set of groups. There is a thing that's at the very top. It's a group called Center Image. I don't care about that. There is a group called Diagrams that's actually got a red label tag on it. If you click on the eyeball of the red label tag, it will turn it on, but nothing inside is turned on. So you need to click the drop-down menu to open, or the drop-down, little triangle to open this guy up. And you will see that there's some groups that are nested inside of it. There is a thing that's called one-point perspective. If you can actually just click on that eyeball, what you should see are 3 cubes. Did everybody get the 3 cubes? Okay, this is another one of those situations where I'm going to end up wasting an hour asking you if you got this stuff. So I'm not going to ask you, but if you do not get something to show up, give me a shout out. I want you to get this stuff. I really want you to do the work that we need to work with this. This will give you an understanding that in all likelihood you've never been exposed to in photography, and it's absolutely critical for you to actually do successful compositing. Okay? So Verser, hey, I didn't get that. Stop, come over here. Nope. Oh, okay, it works now. So what you see in this is what's called a one-point perspective. What you can see in this is that there are these 3 cubes, and they are actually drawn in perspective. And if you look at it, the best way to know, I mean, again, I'm asking you to look at illustrations here, but they look like they're seated on the ground. And the relationship between them, it makes sense. It doesn't look like it's off. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for this is if you scroll down in your layers palette, if you want to, you can actually take your layers palette and expand it. So I'm going to actually click on the line between my properties and layers and just drag it up. So I've got a little bit more space to actually see what's actually going on in here. If you take a look down sort of at the bottom, again, still in the red group, there's a file that's got on here vanishing point. And I want you to click and turn that on. And what you'll see is a series of green lines that are actually coming off of the cubes, and they are all heading back and converging on one point. So what's happening again? These are converging lines. So what they did was it's like they took a ruler and stuck it on the edge of a cube and took it all the way back to a point where it actually hits the horizon line, or where these 2 lines coming off the top of this box on the left converge. The same thing is happening off 3 lines off the cube that's on the other side, as well as the cube that's on the top. They're just tracing the lines of the edges of those cubes. Does that make sense what's going on here? You can sort of see that. And you notice that they all converge in the same spot. The spot that they converge in is called the vanishing point, and that spot is always on the horizon. It establishes the horizon line. So vanishing points in a one-point perspective will always end up converging back onto horizon line, and you will always see the horizon line. It will define the horizon line for you. That's what we use to determine what is and what is not in perspective, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So if you come up into still in the red group, and you'll take a look, there's a group here called free cube. If you can turn on the eyeball for the free cube, you can see that the free cube is also in perspective. To make sure it's in perspective, look right under the eyeball for the free cube. If you click on that next, it will actually show you its converging lines and also its vanishing point. Now, you'll notice that this cube, because it's so far to one side, it is not coming to the vanishing point that we originally established, but it's landing on the horizon, which it will always do. Again, it is a single point and establishing that horizon line. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, I want you to turn off the eyeball for the converging lines. I want you to actually click on the layer that says free cube. So I've selected the layer, and then I'm going to hit the V key to move this. I now have the cursor that's actually got the little move icon on it, and I'm going to click, and I'm just going to drag this straight up and let go. And when you look at this, this is exactly what I was just talking to you about earlier. Doesn't this seem there's something not right about this? You may not know what it is, but it just doesn't feel right. If you hit Command Z to bring it back down, it actually, okay, I believe this. This seems grounded. This seems in place. But when this thing is like floating up in the air, up in here, whatever, you look at this and you know that this is not right. There's no way that this cube could be doing what it is up here in the air as long as the one that's in, near it in the middle that's also up in the air is doing what it's doing. The problem with this is that free cube is no longer in perspective. Good on this part? Okay. You can turn off the eyeball for the one-point perspective. You can actually collapse the entire group. And there's a next group down that is called two-point perspective. And if you click on that eyeball, we have 3 different cubes. And the 3 different cubes that we've got right now are actually two-point perspectives. If you go ahead and you open up the group for two-point perspective, you can also click on the eyeball to show their vanishing lines. And in this case, what we actually have is 2 pairs of converging lines for each of these cubes. You can see there's a pair that comes off one face that's on the left-hand side. I'm talking about the bottom cube right now that goes to the left. There's also one that goes to the right. So the way that you can think about what these are, imagine standing on the corner of a building and you can see the front face of the building and you can see a side of the building. That would be something that would have a two-point perspective, not a single-point perspective like the ones we just looked at. 2 points, because you can actually see 2 faces. Does that make sense, what's going on? So you can think of these as like, department stores, or just to sort of give you some reference of image in this. However, you will notice that the converging lines of all of them land on the vanishing points and the horizon line. They establish the horizon line. Does that make sense? The other thing that you should notice about this that's pretty critical about this one is what you can see when things are in perspective. So if we actually take a look at the cube that's on the bottom, you can actually see the top face of the cube. I can see the top face here. I cannot see the bottom of this cube. It's on the ground. I wouldn't be able to see that. But look at the cube that's floating up in the air. This one is a completely different story. I can see the bottom of this cube, but I cannot see the top. That all has to do with its relationship to the horizon line and the vanishing points. So if you've got something that is above the horizon line, you see the bottom of it, you don't see the top. If you've got something that's below the horizon line, you see the top, not the bottom. If you've got something that's right on the horizon line, perfectly on the horizon line, you do not see the top or bottom, you only see the faces. We good on this part? All right. We can turn off the, don't turn off the 2-point part, turn off the vanishing points. Actually, turn the vanishing points back on and click on the horizon line. All the horizon line does is draw you another line, a blue line, to really illustrate to you that vanishing points establish the horizon line, and the horizon line actually bisects those guys. So we can now turn off the 2-point perspective group eyeball and go ahead and collapse that, and then turn on the group for the eyeball for 3-point perspective and click it to actually open it up. This is an example of a 3-point. You can see we actually see 3 faces on this one. We've got the 2 that are on the side and the 1 that's actually on the bottom. If you click on the vanishing point for it, what you end up seeing is this. In a 3-point perspective, you will always have 2 of the 3 lines establishing vanishing points on the horizon line. But then you will end up having a point that just lands up into space, and it's not on the horizon line. That part doesn't exist. So in our case right here, you could think of this as the cube spaceship that's coming to land on Earth, and you are actually, as it's coming down, you can see the bottom and you can see 2 sides of it, but you can't see the top or the 2 back sides of it. Make sense? If you come up to your image menu and come down to image rotation and do 180 degrees, it will flip the entire image, and now what we are looking at again is a 3-point perspective. The sky now is the ground. The ground now is the sky, because we just flipped this image upside down. This would be what you would see if you were in a helicopter looking down on the top of a cube building. Again, 2 of the 3 points will establish the horizon line. The horizon line in this case is now above what we are looking at. Is this making sense to you guys? Who am I losing here? Okay. You can turn off the 3-point perspective group and collapse that. You can actually undo your rotate canvas to bring it back to the way it was normally, and then turn off your 3-point perspective and collapse that group. And the final one that we're actually going to hit here is the one that's actually called top to bottom boxes. If you can click on that, and you can go ahead and open it up. So what we've got here is something that I pointed out to you earlier when we were looking at our 2-point perspective, and it's this. So these are a series of boxes that are identical, and the first one starts on the ground, and then it's the next one's a little bit higher, the next one's a little bit higher, the next one's higher. And what you can see that's happening on this, these are also all in perspective, but what's happening here is that the box that is the furthest down that's actually on the ground, you would be able to see more of the top of that box than the one that's just above it. And as you start getting closer to the horizon line, you see less and less of the top of the box. However, the minute you go above the horizon line, you don't see any of the top of the box. You actually start seeing the bottom of the boxes as we continue to go up. Is everybody good on what we're looking at here? All right, so then here's your first out of perspective deal. Click on the car underneath it, and you will see that the car is sitting there slightly above the horizon line. Is that in perspective? Is that correct? So, Mara, you're shaking your head no. Why do you know it's not in perspective?
Because you can't see the bottom of the car above the horizon line.
Yes.
Looking up at it.
Exactly right, exactly right. If this car truly were in perspective, we'd be looking at the bottom of the car, and in fact, we're not only not looking at the car, we're looking at part of the top, right? So select the car layer, hit the V key to again get the move tool, and when I look at the car, I can see just a sliver of the top of that car, just a small amount of it, very little bit. What that tells me is that if this was in perspective, the top of that car would be just below the horizon line. So simply drag the car down till it's just below the horizon line. Does that car now look like it's grounded in this image? It does, because it is in perspective. Is this making sense to you guys? Again, hit Command Z. There's no way that's a believable composite. Command Z, believable composite. You cannot believe how many times people put together composites and don't pay attention to exactly this. Now, you may never have been exposed to this before, but inherently you are used to seeing the whole world function like this. So when you have things that are off, you may not be able to even articulate why you think it's off, but you know it's off. And that's what just happened here. Are we good on this part? All right. You can collapse the diagram once. You can turn off the eyeball for the red group and turn on the eyeball for the green group and actually flip that to open it up. So again, this is Jesus Ramirez's artwork. It's not only did he build these, he built these images, the whole 9 yards here. So here we've got a guy that's sitting on the ground. You know, he's sitting here. He's on the ground plane. He is actually in perspective. But if you take a look with the people box opened up, the guy's actually at the very bottom of the group. If you go down to the very bottom of the green group, you'll actually see that the only eyeball on is the one that's right down there. If you click on the eyeball right above it on man number 2, what you'll see is that there is another guy on there who is also in perspective. But the thing that I want you to notice about this is that if people are or if anything is in perspective, anything that is the same size, the horizon line will bisect them no matter where they are in your scene. So look at where the horizon line bisects the guy right here. It's going right through the lower part of his shoulder, sort of like, you know, not quite halfway to his elbow, about a third of the way down to his elbow. The guy that's behind him, the man number 2, the small guy, whatever, same story for him. The horizon line is bisecting him in the exact same spot. That establishes him in perspective. If you click on man number 3, the layer above that, you will see that there's a really small version of this guy way the hell back in space. But the horizon line is bisecting him again through his shoulders. If people are in perspective, he will never, ever, ever go below the horizon line nor above it. He will always be with the horizon line bisecting him in the exact same spot. Does this make sense to everyone, what's going on? Okay, we're going to look at transforming in perspective in just a second to show you how this whole thing works. If you go to the next layer up, the one that says squat number 1, here you'll see a very different scenario. Now in this case, it's the same guy, but he's squatted down. He is no longer 6 feet tall, he's now 3 feet tall. The horizon line does not bisect him through the shoulders because he's not as tall. He's only 3 feet tall. He is in perspective. If he were to stand up, the horizon line would bisect him in his shoulders. However, if you go to the next frame up, the squat number 2, you will see that there is another figure, smaller. The amount of space relative above the guy is going to remain the same no matter where he is in the horizon, where he is in the scene. It's always going to be in that relationship to the horizon line. Make sense?
Could you say that again?
So you see the distance right here. There's a distance. You can look at the distance right here, and you can see that the distance from the horizon line to his shoulders, it's a little bit less than his height. The same thing is going to be true of this guy. The distance from the horizon line to his shoulders is a little bit less than his height. No matter how far I move this person back in perspective, there's always going to be that relationship of a space above him to the horizon line, no matter what. No matter how far I push him back, his shoulders are never going to come above the horizon line. This relationship is always going to remain the same.
Is it like the same proportion?
It is, exactly. It's exactly the same proportion. Exactly. And there's a squat number 3. Click on that. You can see there's another person way the hell back there. But that is all still in perspective because the proportion above that is the same. Is that good for everyone here? Are we good on this? All right, if we go up to the next one, click on woman number 1. So woman number one, you can see in her case, she's standing next to this guy, but the perspective line, the horizon line is not bisecting the lower part underneath her shoulders where it is on the guy. It's actually hitting her almost at the very top of her shoulders. That's because she's shorter. That's the only reason. She is in perspective. If the horizon line was bisecting her at the same place as the guy, we can actually do it. I'll move her up. So the V key, and we'll just move her up so it's bisecting the guy at the same sort of, or about where it's doing the same guy, whatever. She is no longer in perspective. Look at this. It looks wrong. Make sense? All right, Command Z to undo that. We can click on woman number two. It's the same trick. The horizon line will bisect her if she is in perspective at the same part of her body. No matter where she is in this scene, the horizon line will not change. And this becomes critical for us in terms of how we actually do transform in perspective. If you click on the final one, it's a picture of her on a box. And she is now, the horizon line is bisecting her waist. She is in perspective because now she's 10 feet tall because she's standing on a box. Does that make sense? Okay, so you can turn off everybody except for the guy in the very beginning. We're going to actually go down. So I'm just turning everything off till I get down to the one at the very bottom. And select the one, man number one. So how do we transform in perspective? And this is a critical one for you guys. This is what that PDF in there is all about. So I'm going to get through this part, and then we're going to take a quick break. So transforming in perspective. So if everybody's turned off. The reason I just turned everybody off is just to sort of like clear what we're seeing here so it's a little less confusing. Select the guy, hit Command T to do a transform. It brings up the transform dialog box. You have to see the anchor point right here. If you do not see the anchor point, there's a little check mark right under the word Photoshop in the options bar up at the top. Make sure that you check that, and that will give you the anchor point that is in the middle. So here's the trick to transforming in perspective. You want to put the anchor point on the horizon line. So I'm going to click and drag this anchor point. In my case, I'm going to put it on the left-hand side. So I'm going to drag it over here and put the anchor point on the far left side, but the anchor point is right on the horizon line. So simply click and drag the anchor point over to the horizon line. What?
Does it matter where you put the anchor point on?
You're going to see, yes, it does. So put it on the left-hand side for this one really quick. Everybody good on this part? Okay. To do this transform perspective, you actually hold down the Shift key and the Option key, and then it doesn't really matter which handle you grab. I'm going to grab the lower right handle that's on the transform bounding box, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to start to drag backwards, and look what's happening. He is getting smaller, but the space, the place where the horizon line is bisecting him is never changing. He is being transformed in perspective, and you can take him all the way back. You can make him so small you don't see him anymore. I'm not going to make him that small, but I'm going to get him pretty far back there, and then simply hit the check mark. He has now been transformed in perspective. You can see I've made him incredibly small, but it's still, the horizon line is bisecting him in the exact same spot in his shoulders. Did this work for everyone? So what? So you need to hold down the Shift key and the Option key both, and then push one of the handles. Yeah, so hit Command Z because you didn't hit the keyboard shortcut. Hit Command Z again, or Command Option Z. We need to go back to the beginning where he's up in the very front. No, Command Option, and then the letter Z a couple times. No, let's just go back up into here when you said open. Just hit open, just click on open. Or click on the top here. Oh, it's still wanting to transform. Hit the circle with the X, yeah. So he's in the right spot. Okay, Command T. Good, drag the anchor point back onto the horizon line. Great, hold down the Shift key, keep it held, Option key, keep it held. Click Those stay down. Click on this lower corner and push. And there you go. Okay. Hit Command Z to bring him back forward again. Or just go back in your history right before you did the transform. We're going to do it again. Command T to actually do another transform. We're going to actually take him to the other side. So I'm going to drag him off the, I'm going to put the anchor point on the other side. And again, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and the Option key. Now, if you grab that same anchor point, the one that's on the right-hand side, the one that we just used to move him over to the left-hand side, he still goes towards the anchor point. He still goes in the same direction, and he still is being transformed in perspective. Again, this is the anchor point is establishing the direction that you take this. So I'm going to push him in the back right here, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. You should know, though, that he does not have to stay left or right in this. He is in perspective. He can move left and right and stay in perspective. He cannot come forward. He cannot go backward. He cannot go up, and he cannot go down. But he can go left and right and still be in perspective. To do that, hit the V key to get the move tool. Hold down the Shift key before you move him. That will restrict his motion to only one axis. Click on him and drag him either left or right. He is still in perspective. So if you get someone scaled in perspective and you need to move them to a different spot, you can move them all the way across to the other side of your image and they will still be in perspective. Did that make sense? Command Z to undo that. Command Option Z to bring him back to the midpoint right here. So a lot of times you just want him going away from the camera. So to do that, our last one, Command T. Take the anchor point and bring it right up where you think it is. I'm going to put this right in the middle of his chest, but what I'm looking at is the anchor point, the horizon line that's actually right behind him. So I'm just putting it on that point. You would not leave the anchor point where it is, because if you did, he would not transform in perspective. And again, hold down the Shift key and the Option key, click, and you take him straight away from your camera. However, you can also click and you can drag him forward to your camera. This is bringing him all the way up into your frame in perspective. Are we good on this? Questions about this? Okay, I'm going to call it 2:25. Let's do a hard 10, guys. Go get a cup of coffee. It's going to be a long afternoon, but it's as I have promised you so many times before, next level. So really, really quickly, next level. I want to have one quick word about all of that. I personally believe in every single one of you. I do not underestimate any of you. I know you can do this work. That's why I'm willing to throw shit that is this difficult at you. I know you can do this, and I know what a difference this can make to you. So, unlike some other people that maybe underestimate art students, I don't. I was one. I'll see you in 10 minutes. It does what? Oh, he goes upside down?
Flip them upside down.
Yeah.
Is that because of perspective of?
It's because we're anchoring probably that horizon line to him, and if you push him that high up, in order to keep his shoulders in that spot, he has to be upside down.